Good morning, everyone, and happy Wednesday. We'll give everyone a minute to join before we begin. All right, we'll go ahead and get things started here. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today for the webinar, Fieldwire for Low Voltage. My name is Pranati Gumpa, and I'm a Construction Success Manager here at Fieldwire. Before we begin, I would like to address a few housekeeping items. To ensure a smooth session, attendees will be muted, but please don't hesitate to ask any questions you may have in the Q&A panel. We'll have a Q&A session at the end of this presentation, and we will do our best to address as many questions as we can. And for any questions we don't get to, our experts will reach out to you directly. We'll also have some poll questions during the webinar for you to participate in. Please feel free to select your answer when the questions pop up. Additionally, we have a short 5-question survey at the end of the webinar, which we would really appreciate if you can fill it out. This survey helps us to determine the usefulness of the content that we deliver and helps us to plan for our future webinars. Awesome. So before we dive into the webinar, please take a minute to fill out this next poll question so that we can learn a bit about you. And there we go. What type of company you work for? We just have a few options. Just take your time to answer. Awesome. Thank you for that. Without further ado, I would like to welcome one of our construction success managers here, Dylan Reed. Dylan, take the floor.
Awesome. Thank you, Pranati. And thank you, Kelsey, for joining us today. Quick agenda. We're just going to do a brief round of introductions on myself and Kelsey. And then we'll just do a quick overview of the session and what we're going to be covering today. And then we'll dive into a live demo and get into several of Kelsey's actual projects. And then we'll have time for a 10-minute or so Q&A at the end. So as Pranati mentioned, any questions that you have during the session, just go ahead and put them in that questions panel, and we'll do our best to get to those at the end of the session. All right, so quick introduction on myself. I used to work in construction before coming to Fieldwire. I was a project engineer and then an assistant project manager for a large plumbing mechanical subcontractor in the Bay Area. Worked on a variety of different types of projects, but my main focus was kind of large medical office buildings, but then worked on a bunch of other smaller types of projects as well. I then come into Fieldwire now. I work with a variety of customers, many of which are low voltage or electrical, and I basically help them get the most out of Fieldwire through workflow consultations and trainings, and just offering overall expertise to all the different companies that I work with. And today I have one of my customers joined with me, Kelsey Timsaw. And Kelsey, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Hey, good morning. I'm Kelsey Timsaw. I'm the office manager at BEI Construction in our Southern California office here in Chino. I typically manage all of the software training for our new field technicians in Fieldwire, and I set up and I manage projects for our Southern California region. I've also worked for a structural engineering company for 6 years as an engineering assistant, and I have a background in carpentry and construction.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. Really excited to dive into all the exciting ways that you guys use Fieldwire. So quick agenda or focus for today. Obviously, there is a lot within Fieldwire that we could dive into. We're going to be focusing on three main things that Kelsey and her team takes advantage of within Fieldwire. That's forms, plans, and markups within plans, and then tasks. So these will be the three we'll focus on. We'll touch on some other ones as well, but just want to give you a heads up for where the session is going to be going today. Before we dive into the actual presentation, we have another quick poll question that will pop up on your screen in a second here. And go ahead and take a second to answer that before we jump into the demo. All right, thank you so much for taking the time to answer that, and we'll go ahead and dive into it. So we're going to be jumping around to a couple of different projects today, most of which are Kelsey's, one of which is one that I've kind of put together. But we're going to just start out by looking at her first project here. And Kelsey, can you kind of just explain this or just talk about this project a bit and the scope of work that you're responsible for on this project?
So our company is actually doing, it's a new school being built in downtown LA called SEED or SEED LA. Our scope, we are doing AV, we are doing camera installation, we're doing the DAS and fire alarm systems and all of the structured cabling for this new construction.
Awesome. And why do you guys choose to track all of that work within Fieldwire?
With so many different types of tasks and so many scopes of work that we're managing all at once, having this in order to be able to keep us organized and keep track of our progress is incredibly important. Otherwise, we're not being able to have a clear picture to relate to other trades and contractors and our clients would be, a problem if we weren't able to relay that information.
Yeah, totally makes sense. Yeah, you mentioned tasks, like managing those tasks being kind of a big part of it. So let's go ahead and just start kind of diving into the task workflow that you've set up here in this project. Can you just kind of walk us or start by walking us through these statuses and why you've set them up that way for this task workflow?
So this project, we actually, as with many projects, everything is on a time crunch, and we have other trades that are also trying to come in at the same time and working simultaneously. So for this one, we have, typically we're going room by room. So we kind of have very rough breakdowns of these statuses to just kind of display exactly where we are in each room, so that as soon as we finish one certain part of the trade, certain part of our scope, then we can have these other trades come in to follow us, drywall contractors, painters, etc.
Awesome. And then on the left-hand side here, your categories, can you just talk about how you set these up and kind of why you set them up that way?
Yeah, you can see that we have 700 tasks for this project. So being able to have our individual teams sort and filter through exactly what their scope is very important, just so that they don't get completely overwhelmed by the sheer amount of information that's available to them.
Yep, totally makes sense. Awesome. Well, let's go ahead and dive into an actual task here. I'm gonna pull open this task and we'll just start by going through the task attributes on the right-hand side here. So for everyone that's unfamiliar with kind of tasks or like what the attributes do, they're basically your way of filtering and sorting. The more that you get, the more detailed you get with these attributes, the more options you have to filter and sort on that data. It also gives you like an easy place to kind of collect data as well. So starting at the top here, we can see that this task has kind of gone through all the necessary statuses and is now complete. So it's now in the verified status, but it's gone through all these other statuses first. And then this category here, we have it broken out, like Kelsey was saying, by kind of the different types of work and device types. So that's been selected here. let's go ahead and talk about that one below that. So it looks like you have an assignee here. Are you guys typically assigning these tasks to specific people on this project?
Yes, because we have, with the multiple different scopes, we typically have it broken down into multiple teams. So we have a foreman assigned for the AV scope, we have a foreman assigned for the DAS scope, for the structured cabling. So typically, if I have the information ahead of time, then I can go ahead and assign it to whichever team is I know is already going to be working on that portion. Or if we have a general foreman on site, everything can be assigned to the general foreman, and then he can go ahead and delegate out exactly which team it's going to be assigned to.
Awesome. And then below that, we can see that this is pinned to a specific location on the plan, which we will come back to in a second here and the importance of that. But the next one I want to touch on here is just tiered locations that you're taking advantage of here. Can you just explain how you're using these locations and then the value that you're getting out of it by doing it this way?
Yeah, because we end up, like I said, we have other trades and contractors that are waiting for us to finish our scope before they can move into certain spaces. Being able to very quickly sort and filter through, okay, first floor, these classrooms, being able to show them exactly where our progress is so that they can anticipate starting their trade is really important. We can generate the reports off of that to give a really quick understanding of where everything is located.
Yeah, and just to show people an example here, you can do that with either generating reports, or you can also go ahead and filter by locations within this filters option here. And so in that specific instance, if I wanted to filter out for all tasks that are related to section D, that's another, like, it's a quick way of being able to figure out all of your tasks in a specific location. So again, the more the detail that you get with those kind of task attributes, the more options you have for filtering and sorting on that information. All right, let me go back and get back into that task here. Awesome. And then it looks like you have quite a few different watchers down here. What's the reasoning for that? And yeah, can you just talk about like all the different, like why you have all these different watchers in here and kind of why it's been set up that way?
So some of those watchers are going to be the superintendent or the general foreman that is already, kind of overseeing the entirety of the project. I'm on there. And then we also have multiple project managers sometimes, one that's managing the AV scope, one that's managing the DAS and the fire alarm, et cetera. So it's a great way to make sure that everyone can view exactly what they need to see and have a limited and more narrow scope for each person.
Yeah, and then also to highlight on that, anytime that a task gets passed to somebody new, if they've been assigned to it previously, they'll automatically get added as a watcher. So everyone's kept up to date on any like changes that are happening with those tasks. Awesome. So let's now talk about just kind of the content of the task in the middle here. It looks like this one has a nice checklist here. Do you typically have like standard checklists that you're using for different device types on these projects?
Typically, we have a couple of template checklists that we kind of start out with for a lot of our major projects. And then, of course, we can customize them based on if we have new devices that we haven't really seen before, if they just have a different kind of setup. So they're a great way to use it. And then one of the other features that we love about it is having, as soon as you click any of those boxes, it time and date stamps everything so that we can see exactly who it was and where they are with the status on every single item.
Awesome. Yeah, I think that feature is super critical. Just be able to go back and see if there's any issues or make sure that it's all being completed on time. All right, let's go down, kind of scroll down here to further down in the task, and let's just talk about the messaging field down here. Can you just talk about the kind of the usefulness of this for kind of communication and just documenting your work as you go within each task?
We love attaching pictures to everything where we can, because again, pictures are going to be time and date stamped as soon as they've been added. But we tend to find we use it for using to kind of verify statuses of where things are as far as progress, but also we end up using it when we find issues on the job site as well. We've found things that get damaged by not necessarily us, but by other trades, other contractors. So it's a great way to verify and just have backup documentation for pretty much everything that we have.
Right. Awesome. All right, so we're gonna go back ahead and click on this plan sheet where this task is located, just to give a visual representation of kind of what, how this kind of, well, just the benefit of pinning tasks directly onto the plans. So are you, yeah, you can see we have quite a few different task pins dropped onto this plan, all with different colors, letting us know the statuses here. Can you talk about, are you guys dropping these task pins individually each time you're like creating a task?
Most of the time, we try to use the task importer as much as we can. If we already know we have 100 cameras, then I can put it together in the importer just to kind of make it a little bit faster and streamline the process. But then we are typically manually dropping them onto the correct locations for every single device that we have.
Awesome, cool. And I'm actually going to go ahead and show everybody what that looks like in a second here. But Kelsey, can you also just talk about the value of having kind of all of these different, like the colors associated with the task pins and like how that helps you and your team in the field know what's going on with those tasks without having to kind of click into them?
Yeah, so I'm a very visual kind of learner. So making sure that we have being able to open up each plan individually to have that really quick, able to visualize exactly where our status is on every single location. It works well for us. It works well for clients to be able to kind of, quickly get a glance without having to dive deep into generate reports.
Awesome. And then one other thing to highlight with the categories that have been set up on the left-hand side here. Can you just talk about just also having that 2-digit identifier that also kind of gives you an idea of what's going on with that task in addition to the color?
Yeah, it just helps so that when we have our foremen on site that are actively working, it helps to be able to not have to click on every single one. If you're looking for a camera, you know exactly what the symbol is that you're looking for. Just makes everything a little bit faster.
Awesome. Okay, well, we're gonna jump into another one of your projects where you kind of took a slightly different approach and set up your statuses a little bit differently. Can you just talk about how or why you set these statuses up the way you did and why it's like a little bit different from the previous project that we looked at?
So this is another new construction for UC San Diego campus. This one is not on the same type of time crunch. So our team tends to be doing entire floors or entire phases all at once. So they're roughing in the cable for an entire floor, which could be significantly longer compared to the other job where they're finishing in the entire room and within the span of a week. So by the time if they're doing an entire floor at once, by the time they come back to a location, they are going to need to have a little bit more information on exactly where they've left off the status on all of them. So first they're roughing in the cable for the whole floor, then they're terminating, then certifying, that could be weeks later. So we broke it down a little bit differently with a little bit more detail in it to make sure that they can keep track of where they are for all of those tasks.
Awesome. And for everybody newer to Fieldwire, you have up to 7 of these different statuses. So yeah, you can get pretty customized if you want, or keep it more simplified, but lots of options there. Kelsey, can you just talk about maybe the value that you find in Fieldwire being more like flexible to be able to set it up in different ways, and kind of how that is part of your training when you're training new users?
So when I have new users coming in, I like to show them kind of Fieldwire as a whole. I will show them multiple different projects, the capacity of Fieldwire in general. And then the best part is being able to say, okay, now let's look at your project. Let's figure out what's the workflow, what's the requirements, what's our schedule, what's the client going to ask for as far as communication goes. So then we will go through and build that person's project specifically in a way that's going to best benefit for what is actually happening on their site.
Awesome. All right, let's go ahead and go into one of these tasks to show a couple unique things that you're doing on this specific project. I'm going to go ahead and open this task. And this looks a little bit different from the previous project that we were looking at. So I just want to highlight some of these like kind of key differences or pieces of Fieldwire that you're taking advantage of uniquely in this project. And first, just want to go through the related tasks here. Can you just talk about how you're using related tasks and kind of why that is helping you on this specific project?
So in this instance, this is a security project. So what ends up happening is we have one door that in order to get that one door fully functional, there may be 6 different devices. It has to be plugged into the panel. We have a card reader on both sides. There's a motion detector. There's a push to exit button. But instead of trying to cram all of that information into a single task, we end up having these related tasks. So we can look at one, this task ends up looking at the panel view to make sure that everything is plugged in and functional, but then we can go into each one individually to check the status of each of those devices that's related in order to close and have the entire door system completed.
Awesome. And going back into the main one here, yeah, just it's super valuable just to be able to see that you can, you have 3 completed, but you're still, these other 3 have not been completed and it's not a fully functioning system yet, right?
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Cool. All right. That is what I wanted to highlight on that project. I think that's super cool what you're doing there. Okay, before we dive into talking about how you guys are using forms and markups on your projects, I did just want to highlight a couple other ways that low voltage contractors can kind of take advantage of some other tools within Fieldwire. And then first one was what Kelsey was talking about when it comes to the task importer. So the task importer is basically being able to upload tasks in bulk instead of having to drop those pins individually each time. So what we recommend doing is taking this format and putting this into either like an Excel file or a Google Sheets file and kind of building out your all of your different tasks that you might be uploading into Fieldwire. So to show you an example here, that's what I've done. I have my names of the tasks, the statuses here. They're all going to be, I'm going to default them to not started. I have all of my different categories set up, who I'm assigning it to, the plan. So the plan's pretty important. I just want to make sure that it has a plan associated with it, so that'll allow me to drag and drop them onto specific locations. And then I also, there's a lot of other different kind of fields that you can fill out here depending on like the project. But in this case, I also want to just do a related task. Actually, sure that's good to go. And then also I have some checklists associated with it. So these checklists have already been set up within this project. I'm just going to, this is going to reference it and automatically set up those checklists for me. So to do that, I just go ahead and copy this. And then I can go into my project here, go ahead and paste that. And then you'll notice when I go to import tasks, those are all automatically populating right here. And they're all going to be in diamonds, which means that they're associated with the plan, but they're not actually pinned to a specific location on the plan. So then when I go to my plans that it's associated with, I can see all of these locations listed on the right-hand side here. So from here, I can go ahead and just drag and drop it to specific locations, and it's a pretty quick and easy process from there. So it really makes it a lot easier to do that bulk upload and not spend a whole lot of time just dropping individual tasks at a time. All right, so a couple other things I just wanted to highlight is one additional status that's slightly different from what Kelsey was doing, and that's just a constraint status. So this can be helpful for contractors if you're running into like any issues on your projects and you're being held up by certain trades or your work is just being delayed in any way. Having that constraint status means that you can just move that task into that status and then you can add in any information that you need. So in this case, I double clicked this and said like, hey, this hasn't been completed yet. I also added in a photo and I said the reason for why this has, or just giving context as to what's happening with this task. Makes it pretty easy just to move things there and show that it's being delayed. And then from here, I can also go ahead and generate a report. And so in this case, I have a dedicated constraint report that I'll dive into here. And the main thing here is that I'm just selecting that constraint status, and then everything else is kind of I'm including everything. The left-hand side here is just all of the details within the task, and then the formatting of it, whether I want like a table of contents, full plans, all of that kind of like formatting. And then on the right-hand side is my filtering. So all of those like task attributes that we talked about. Again, the more detailed you are with those, the more options you have for filtering and sorting for like reporting. And then at the bottom here, I also have options to send it on a recurring basis. So if I want to just send this every Monday and Friday, I can. You can also just download it immediately, send it monthly. You have a couple different options there. And just to give you an example of what that looks like, this is what the report will look like. You just have your logo at the top here. And then you also have, in this case, I have a table of contents with hyperlinks here. So if I click on this, it'll bring me to that specific task. And it has all that relevant information saying where we're being held up, what's going on with it. And everyone, you're able to communicate that to the GC or whoever you need to, saying like what's going on with it. Last thing in this project before we jump into another one of Kelsey's projects is our custom task attributes. So on the low voltage side, and this one's kind of specifically around security, custom task attributes are basically customized ways of collecting additional data within the attribute side here. And again, this is a great way of being able to collect specific information and then also be able to sort and filter by that information. So you can see at the bottom here below watchers, everything below that has been customized attributes that I put in here. So in this one case, I have the MAC address, the IP address, username, password. All of these are ones that I've fully customized. And these can be a short text entry, they can be a number, or they can also be a drop-down status. So in this case, I have a constraint drop-down. So this one, was in a constraint status, but I wanted to specify exactly who we're waiting on. I could put that in here as well. And so it gives me a little bit more options of like being very specific on what we're waiting on. And again, when I add those custom task attributes, I now have the option of like filtering and sorting by that. So in this case, if I wanted to just filter out by waiting on GC, I can see exactly that I just have one task that's happening with. And to change those, just want to highlight this one last thing. You just go up to the little settings icon here, and you just go down to the bottom, add custom attribute, and then you have a drop-down list of short text, number, or list to add it in there. And you can also turn off and reorder things if you want. Okay, let's get back to one of your projects, Kelsey. And we're gonna go into the UCSD project here. And let's go ahead and talk about how you guys are taking advantage of plans and doing your markups. So I'm gonna pull up a drawing here. All right, so can you just talk about how your guys in the field are using markups?
Yeah, so one interesting thing that we've kind of noticed with low voltage work is a lot of the time the conduit and the pathways have not necessarily been added to plans when we first get onto job sites. The size of the conduit, if it doesn't meet a certain size limit, it's not often incorporated into AutoCAD or BIM drawings. So our guys end up in the field, they have to end up kind of designing and figuring out exactly where they're putting their pathways while they're on site. But of course, we need to make sure to relay that to all of the other trades and contractors and make sure we're not blocking anyone else's pathway. So typically we'll end up adding these red line markups and any other kind of notes that are applicable so that then we can make sure that we have record of exactly where everything's gone so that we can turn it into as-built afterwards.
Awesome. And what is that process for kind of turning these markups into as-builts for you guys?
One way that we can always do it is we can always export the drawings directly out of Fieldwire, but we found it more beneficial that we just have our drafting team is also familiar and has access to Fieldwire. So once a project is nearing completion, once we are starting to get to the point where we need to start putting together our closeout package, we will add our drafting team directly to each Fieldwire project individually so that they have access to all of the information. We give them the test results, we give them all of the drawings, and they're able to start working on all of those as-built for us in AutoCAD.
Awesome. All right, so one last thing within this project before we take a look at a slightly different workflow. Let's go ahead and click on your forms here. What are some of the different types of forms that you'll use from project to project?
So we've created a handful of new templates that we kind of have stored in some of our template projects that we import into every new project that we open. Our most common one is going to be our daily reports, which they track our weather, the roster, who's on site. We kind of just keep it as a daily log that almost every contractor is going to ask for daily reports at some point or another. We can keep track of any delays that are on site, any equipment that's used, if we're logging contractors, any additional photos that aren't necessarily associated with tasks, we also will attach to it. And also at the very bottom, we also add a signature tab because there are sometimes when our clients want us to have them sign off at the end of every single day's work. So being able to get a live signature at the end of the day is really important.
Awesome. And another one that looks like it's pretty common that you use is these the JSAs here. Can you just talk about those for a second?
Yeah, JSAs are definitely our second most commonly used form because they should be filling it out at least on a weekly basis, if not a daily basis. And it's going to depend on the requirements of the contractor. So these ones we have, okay, they're supposed to, the foreman goes in, what are the hazards on site? What is the required PPE? Who's in attendance of these kind of daily safety briefings that we do at the very beginning of every single day. And then we make sure that everything is going to be in safety compliance. You never want a job site held up because you're not in safety compliance.
Yeah, totally. Okay, awesome. So we're going to take a look at a different project that has a more service-oriented workflow. But before we dive into that project, we're going to launch another quick poll question, and then we'll get into it. All right, just a few more seconds here, if you don't mind just filling this out before we dive into the last part of the presentation here. All right, awesome. Thank you for participating in that. Okay, Kelsey, can you just talk about what type of work this is for, this project that we're looking at?
Yeah, so we have a service contract at JPL, the NASA campus in Pasadena, and almost all of it is going to be ticket-based service. So anytime my phone is down, we're moving a piece of furniture, we need a new Ethernet port to be installed on a certain wall. Our team on site ends up receiving a service request, and the foreman ends up creating a new task that is associated with it so we can track each one individually, because each one is going to be billed and tracked on a time and material basis. So we have to make sure that we have a log for every single individual task.
Awesome. All right, let's go ahead and take a look at one of these tasks here. Can you remind me which number of tasks we should be taking a look at?
773 in the build column.
773. Awesome. Okay, so this one looks obviously slightly different from the other tasks that we've taken a look at. First one thing I wanted to highlight is just that you have this PDF hyperlinked in here. Let's go ahead and open that, and can you just talk about what this PDF is for and why you have it linked to this task?
So this PDF is actually the request for work that our foreman is receiving on site. So it ends up having the building location, a kind of a brief description, and then who it's being assigned to. And it can also contain any other pertinent information that is going to be required in order to get the work started, scheduled, and progress started on it.
Awesome. One of the other unique things it looks like on this task is that you have an actual form that hyperlinked to or linked to it. Can you just talk about this form and what you're doing with it and why it's linked to this task as well?
Yeah, so these bits are daily task reports. So again, we have to track each of these tasks individually and independently of all of the other ones. So as soon as work is started on one of these tickets, we end up tracking every single hour that gets logged onto it. We have a brief scope of work. We have every single, all of the hours, all of the technicians that have logged in and how many hours they've worked. We can also kind of continue on to adding complications. We do also keep a bill of material so that we can be sure to bill for it at the end of the month. And we have the bill of material kind of broken down into two sections here. We have our standard bill of material that is a drop-down list of all of our most standardly used material for our job sites. But then we have an additional materials list that is any kind of unique things that we don't order on a regular basis, but we still have to make sure to track and bill for.
And just to highlight that for everybody, this is a drop-down list, and this one is, like Kelsey was saying, and this one's just a short text entry that you can just type in for each new entry. Awesome. Okay, one last thing on this that I wanted to highlight before we wrap it up and dive into the Q&A. It looks like you have a plan sheet linked here, but for everyone, we kind of just went through this, but this is a diamond, so it's not pinned to a specific location on the plan. Can you just talk about that briefly? Like what it looks like you have a plan, but it's not pinned to any specific location?
So this one is what ends up happening with a lot of these service tickets is a lot of them are just very independently isolated from all of the other rooms. So we are just kind of given a snapshot of how the room currently looks so that we can still add notes. We can still provide this documentation and backup to what work has already been completed, and we can attach pictures to it as necessary as well. But we don't necessarily need the full picture of the entire building. We only need the one room at the time.
Awesome. And it looks like you're still adding lots of markups within Fieldwire and adding in these photos just to, have a lot of good context added, which looks great. Great. Well, I think that kind of wraps it up for this last service-oriented workflow here. Thank you so much, Kelsey. I really appreciate you joining us, and it was such a pleasure getting to get to see all the different ways that you guys get to are taking advantage of Fieldwire. All right, Pranathi, I will hand it back to you, and we'll get into the Q&A session.
Awesome. Thank you, Dylan. Thank you, Kelsey, for going over these workflows and showing it in action on your projects. Before we dive into a Q&A session, we have one last poll here for you. And there it is. Just want to know if you are interested in implementing any of these workflows partially or fully that you saw today. Just take a minute to answer those. And we'll dive into the Q&As right after. Also, feel free to add any other questions you guys have to the Q&A panel. Awesome. Now let's get into the Q&A. I have a question here for you, Kelsey. So what is the purpose of a daily report form if we can generate a daily report automatically using the tasks? I mean, the person here wants to understand what value do you see in having a separate daily report?
Sometimes we end up being able to track multiple tasks instead of just having the status. Sometimes there are other things that happen on the job site that happen outside of the tasks. It could be, there was one horrible instance where there was a gas leak on a job site, so we had to evacuate a certain part of it. It's not related to an individual task, but we had material deliveries. We have just other things that happen that aren't necessarily going to affect the status of each task individually, or we don't want to add that status to all of the tasks that it ends up affecting, but we can end up still kind of relaying that information regardless, and having the rosters available too is really useful for us.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Another question, Dylan, maybe you can take this. Can you see task features to build Gantt charts before starting the project? So can we basically add start and end dates and like build like a Gantt chart with the task before starting the project?
Oh yeah, definitely. And that honestly with the task importer is a pretty good option for kind of doing that in bulk. It has all of those attributes will be part of, so if I go into this task importer here, the attributes will be listed across the board here. So start and end date, you can populate those, and then it will populate with the task when you upload it. And in this case, you can see I have my start and end date in here. That's why they're popping up within the overdue column. And then, yeah, when you get into the Gantt chart, it should, if I have the right date range, it'll populate in here as well. So yeah, just the key part for having it pop up on the Gantt chart is that you just add in those dates, either individually when you're doing tasks, or you can also do it via that task importer. Does that answer the question, Pranathi?
Yep, that's awesome. The next question we have here is, how do custom attributes show on the reports?
Yeah, great question. So on the reports here, it's basically going to be filtering out, let's see, let me go back into the actual project here and go into tasks. So when I go ahead and hit generate report, I have, let's see, all of these kind of selected. So if it has a MAC address or IP address, username, password, it will include those in there. So I'll go ahead and just change this to commissioned here and generate a quick report. But it basically, when you add those custom task attributes, they're now populating on the left-hand side as options that you can select to include within that report. And so if I go into one of these tasks here, you can see this one has all of those filled out. And so now it's being populated in this report with all of those different attributes that I chose to include.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dylan. Kelsey, maybe you can take this. We have a couple of questions around multiple users working on the same project, and how do you about the automatic update from the devices to the same project. Maybe can you talk a little bit about how many people work on a project simultaneously? How quickly do updates come across different people?
Typically, we haven't had any kind of issues with delays in those live transfers. Everything gets updated very simultaneously. I love showing it off in trainings that while I am doing something on my laptop, while I am doing kind of demoing something, the live updates come through on the tablets pretty simultaneously or with only a couple seconds of delay. We have some job sites in our company that have dozens of people with tablets on that are actively working on the same job at a time. So we haven't really run into any issues in that regard. Everything updates live, and then we have very active, current progress tracking for all of the different tasks and stuff.
Awesome. And also, do you guys have like a Wi-Fi connection throughout, or people use cellular on their iPads? How does that work?
It depends on the job site. All of our tablets do have cellular data on them. We have had some job sites that have been big enough and long enough that we have had a cellular service installed, or we'll have permanent hotspots installed in construction trailers. It really just depends on the scope of the job site and just the logistics of what makes sense cost-wise and resource-wise to install.
That's awesome. Thank you. And here there's one last question that we'll take today. Are watchers billable users? Maybe Dylan, can you throw a little bit light about watchers?
Yeah, watchers. So just to be clear, watchers are people that you're including within a task to get notifications on what's going on with any given task. So instead of, you have the assignee field, and they'll obviously get, all notifications will go to them. But then watchers are basically like how you're CCing people on those tasks. So those are fully functioning. Yeah, those, anybody that is on Fieldwire on a project, it requires a license, and so they'll be billed, or they'll use up a license, which will they'll be billable for.
Awesome. Thank you. We do have a lot more questions and we can't get to them now, but we'll have someone reach out to you and answer your questions. Thank you everyone for attending today. I'm gonna send this recording of the webinar to all of you, and feel free to share it with others who couldn't attend today. I hope the session was useful, and we have a 5-minute quick survey right after this. Feel free to just stay back and answer that so that we know how you feel about this content that we are putting together for these webinars. Thank you again and have a great day.
Thanks for joining, everyone, and thanks, Kelsey.
Thank you, Kelsey.
Thanks.